Welcome to the stage, the Executive Director of the Ohio Economic Development Association, Jennifer Price. So Jennifer, welcome to Jennifer. We also have the President of ACEC Ohio, Beth Easterday. Welcome to Beth. And both Beth and Jennifer's organizations are lead partners for today's event, and we appreciate your support in making this possible. And then last but not least, we have Justin Barnes, who's the Executive Director of the Ohio Chamber Research Foundation. So let's welcome our panelists to the stage, and then we'll get into conversation. Well, Beth, Jennifer, Justin, we're so excited to have you here today. We've heard from one candidate for governor. We've got the other one after this panel, and there's so much to talk about that I want to just jump in. But because each of you represents a different group of people, I want you to have the chance to share what your organization does and what you're excited about. And Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Great, thank you. So I am very proud to serve as the Executive Director of the Ohio Economic Development Association. That's a mouthful, so you probably hear OEDA more often than that. But OEDA is the State Professional Association for Economic Developers and those who are part of the economic development ecosystem. So that would capture workforce development, community development, and similar fields and activities. We have 600 members who work at the local, regional, and state level in all of Ohio's 88 counties. And they come from a diversity of organizations, everything from local government and private economic development organizations to chambers and port authorities, utilities, engineering, law, finance, banking. All of that is, again, very important to the fabric of economic development in Ohio. We focus on providing our members with three things to support them, and that is expanding their knowledge, expanding their network, and expanding their influence at the State House and in Congress. We know, especially with economic development, and because there are so many partners, that it's really important to make sure that economic development professionals are prepared to win, because prepared communities are the ones that can compete and win. So we focus a lot on professional development, everything from training courses. We have a state certification program that's really exciting. And it's always interesting to me, you go to the courses, and it's not just economic development folks. We have mayors, we have other elected officials who tap into those programs because they play such an integral part in economic development in their communities. And so again, another big thing is expanding their network. We know that we have all this structured learning. There's so much peer-to-peer education and knowledge exchange that goes on. So our events, like our annual summit coming up, and this isn't a shameless plug, but coming up, well, it might be, on October 3rd through 6th in Dublin, it's something our members really value. And you'll see so much conversation and discussion, and they really learn from one another, and that's really important. We know they value that, so we really strive to provide that. And again, the next piece would be their influence. So we work with our legislative counsel, Bricker and Eckler, to be engaged on the policy issues that impact economic development. I know we're going to talk about a lot of those today, so.
No doubt, and as someone who's attended the event, it's worth shamelessly plugging. It's a great event. Beth, why don't you go ahead and tell us about ACEC Ohio?
So I'm Beth Easterday. I'm president of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Ohio. I think I have Jennifer beat on the acronym for how long the name is. We're actually known better as ACEC Ohio. We are the trade organization that promotes, protects, and advocates for the business of engineering. So our members are engineering companies. We are 150 member companies strong, representing over 8,000 employees in the state of Ohio. We also do a lot of programming, educational programming that we bring to our members. Our main goal is to make sure that we're providing and representing the engineering community in Ohio, making sure that the economic atmosphere in Ohio is good for the business side of things. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about what we're working on here at ACEC Ohio during the panel.
Great, well said. And Justin, the Ohio Chamber Research Foundation.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justin Barnes. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chamber Research Foundation. It's an affiliated organization with the Ohio Chamber. We are a separate 501c3, but we're closely linked to the Ohio Chamber. The Ohio Chamber itself has thousands of members all across the state of Ohio, but really we represent the employer community. There's over 300,000 employers in the state of Ohio, And it's the Chamber's job to provide a voice to those businesses and those business leaders in the State House, in the administration, and in Washington. So what the Research Foundation does is we operate essentially as the think tank for the Chamber. We do a lot of data research and analysis to determine what the trends are, what the issues impacting businesses are, what employers are feeling about the economy, and how we can provide data and figures and information to policymakers and thought leaders across the state to help their decision-making processes and help them better understand how the effects of their decisions impact the business community.
Great. Well, again, welcome to all three of you. So this is an Ohio forum, and these are leaders of Ohio organizations, but we're going to ask them to think bigger because we're all affected by major national trends that are really pressing right now. Inflation, supply chain issues. This is impacting so much of the work and the planning around the state, whether it's economic development or building infrastructure or business. So maybe we'll start with Beth. How are these trends impacting your work and the work of your members?
Yeah, so ACEC has a research institute, and we just completed an engineering sentiment report for Q3. And in looking at that, the concerns that, at least from the engineering side, are inflation, as William mentioned, and rising costs. You know, inflation in July was 8.5%. Business First yesterday just, stated that construction costs are up over 14% this year. And so what does that mean for the impact of this large infrastructure funding coming into Ohio? Are we going to erode some of that capability of, the money coming in with the cost increases? And so it's a concern. Other concerns that the sentiment report indicated also were qualified labor shortages. I think everybody knows we're looking for talent. And just increasing interest rates and just general economic uncertainty. So those are kind of like what our community is looking at as we're looking across the bigger picture, William. And I think, the good news is we're feeling very, very optimistic with infrastructure funds coming in, particularly in the areas of transportation, water, wastewater, energy, utilities. We are seeing a softening of the commercial market as well as the residential market. But overall, everything from the infrastructure side of the dollars coming in, we're feeling very, very strong about.
Yeah. Justin, what about your membership? How are you working with them on these major issues?
Yeah, so I think obviously the pandemic and the supply chain disruptions that came as a result of that were very impactful for almost all of our members. And I think you've seen some of that in a desire to bring some of the supply chain back to the United States and back to Ohio. Obviously, that's part of the reason why the Intel announcement was so impactful, is because we know that following along with that is going to be a massive impact on their supply chain, both up and downstream. So we're looking forward to working with them to help build out that to the extent that we can. But I think you see it in the inflation question as well. We continue to it was just announced yesterday that the economy actually grew in the second quarter, and the Fed Chairman Powell just spoke at an event in Colorado this morning, and he said the economy should prepare for a little bit of pain, which signals to some people that there's going to be probably another 75 or 100-point basis hike in the interest rate in the near term. So that'll continue to have impacts on businesses across the state of Ohio and across the country, but we'll continue to see some of those shifts in supply chain as folks try to shorten those and minimize those disruptions moving forward.
Yeah, a little bit of pain is never what you want to hear from anybody at the national level.
Right.
And Jennifer, your members are at the front line of economic development. So how are you advising them?
Well, this is what's going to be really interesting is when we talk to our members, over and over, we hear that their pipeline is at the highest volume they've ever seen, which tells us that Ohio has succeeded in building an attractive, resilient economy, and that the businesses that have the resources and are looking to locate and expand are choosing Ohio. So that's really awesome. So it's interesting because we have a lot of these things that in a way don't match up, but I feel like a lot in our world hasn't necessarily matched up in the last few years. So we know that, again, Ohio's in a great position for those businesses, attracting them and keeping them. But flipping back to our members who are on the front lines, helping small businesses, and we know that is very much the backbone of our state economy, even though big projects and big location and attraction searches, get the headlines, small business is extremely important to our communities and making sure they stay strong. And that's a big part of what our members do. They are very much focused on supporting the businesses in their community. And they really act as connectors and conveners and helping them tap into the resources so that they can not just survive, but thrive. So I would say that our members will tell you they're busier than ever between the needs of their existing businesses, some which are expanding, some are trying to survive, and also the pipeline in Ohio. And this predates even some of the Intel announcement, which again, speaks to the fact that though the spotlight is on Ohio now, it was already on the map. And again, a lot of that is work that Jobs Ohio and the regional partners and all the local partners have done over the past decade plus. But definitely, I think it also reflects how well Ohio did during the pandemic. There was a lot of, Ohio was nimble in responding and supporting their businesses. A lot was done to even start reshoring then. So I think that, we're still riding some of that positive and that energy and that momentum.
So busier than ever. And then we had this thing called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill that Beth mentioned. And this is that once-in-a-decade opportunity to get in front of all of those additional investments we want to do, modernization, resiliency. Beth, you brought it up first. So how should Ohioans leverage these dollars? And then either one of you can jump in.
Sure, and I think it's been talked about all day already. I mean, I think the term's been generational impact of dollars coming into Ohio, but let's be honest, this is something that's long overdue, and it's something that we have been hoping for, planning for years, and the can just kept getting kicked down the road. So the fact that it's here right now is fantastic for our industry and for Ohio in general, and to be able to take advantage of some of the new programs that are coming in with the bipartisan infrastructure law is also very valuable to Ohioans and the communities that we as engineering companies serve. Somebody said, are you mobilized for this? And my answer is the engineering community is always mobilized for this. It's part of our role and responsibility when we work with our clients is to help them find funding. I mean, our job is we solve problems, right? You as communities have problems and you bring in a consulting engineer and we help you solve those problems. And we do that through actually looking for funding alternatives as well as solutions. And I think as we look at the infrastructure bill and what it's bringing to Ohio as far as dollars, I mean, we're talking about electric vehicle charging stations are going in, broadband, water, energy, as well as our traditional surface transportation programs. There's just so much opportunity. And I think that we are ready, able, and already willing to help Ohioans get to where they need to be with their projects. Ironically enough, I had a member here earlier, and we had talked about the national perspective just recently, but his company just yesterday won a contract from the General Services Administration for electric vehicle charging stations. And so the rippling impact of the bill is actually on the federal contracting level too, hitting Ohio-based companies. And he's going to be working in a region that has probably 10 states. Believe it or not, the federal government has 600,000 vehicles that are going to be electrified and ready to go by 2035. And so that infrastructure that they're putting into place with these kind of dollars is fascinating. And I think, again, back to your question about Ohio, we are in a great position to take advantage of all of those dollars, and we should be afraid to look at what's available and where we can put the dollars.
Jennifer, Justin, would you agree? What's the strategy?
Absolutely.
Here?
I think any opportunity we can utilize those federal dollars is an opportunity to increase economic development in Ohio, because whether it's surface transportation, waterways, across the board, there are plenty of projects across the state that would be happy to take those federal dollars and use them as a force multiplier to increase economic development in their communities. So it's a big impact, and we're looking forward to seeing how it plays out.
I want to add just a slightly different dimension and kind of shift, because for so long, again, they kick the can down the road. These are huge dollar amounts because of that. And for so long, it was, the barrier was money. And so now that we have the money, I think Ohio policymakers and elected officials at the state, at local and regional level, across the board, we need to really have a discussion about policy and how, now that we have these dollars, what do our policies need to be like to address a lot of the problems that we have? And if you look at underserved, unserved communities, if you look at equity, if you look at the things that are barriers to prosperity, such as housing, such as transportation, such as childcare, so many things, environmental remediation issues, we have the dollars. So making sure we actually spend them and we fully leverage them, and making sure that we have policies that complement the dollar investment is going to be really important. And we'll talk a little bit about workforce in a bit, but if you can say altruistically that we want every Ohioan to be able to participate and benefit in Ohio's economy, strong economy, comparatively to many other states. But if we don't address some of those barriers with policy as well as money, we're not going to be able to do that. And to be able to get more people who can participate in the workforce, we need to look at some of those underlying issues and be very proactive in our policy side as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's not just about advancing for the future, it's about bringing everybody with us. So we mentioned busier than ever, enormous bills, uncertainty at the federal level, but we've been planning for it in Ohio. And we're ready for this moment. And then this little project called Intel, which could be up to $100 billion, one of the world's largest semiconductor plants, was dropped in Ohio. And Jennifer, it's the largest economic development deal in Ohio's history. So how are your members reacting to this? It's not just Central Ohio, it's a statewide play. How are we getting ready for that?
Right, and I'm going to try to avoid not mentioning things that have already been discussed today.
Sure.
But again, when you look at the investment and what it means in terms of 3,000 Intel jobs, 7,000 construction jobs, 140 existing Ohio companies who are suppliers, potential 40 plus, suppliers will be attracted to the state. Those numbers, what goes behind those numbers is what's really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit again. I want to pivot to workforce, and because it's really interesting, it's not just their CapEx. It's not just the number of jobs created, but the investment that they have made. I think it's going to be an interesting model to see, and it really creates a precedent for other projects like this, even smaller projects. In terms of they're making a $100 million commitment to workforce over the next 10 years in Ohio. So that doesn't just benefit them, that benefits every manufacturer in the state of Ohio. And what that means in terms of us being able to, again, pull more people in, because we'll have more programs and resources for skill development, but we will also be able to retain, a lot of the tech talent that we are losing. So I think it was a study in the last maybe 2 years ago, but Columbus was at the top in terms of tech talent. I think it was CBRE that did this report, but number one in small markets in North America for tech talent. And again, you look at our universities, that's not necessarily surprising. So, but we still know we're losing a lot. And you get a lot of synergies, even though I hate that word. But the ability to, I think we're going to see a big spike in that talent that we can retain and that we're not going to lose. So I think workforce is going to be really interesting. And again, it's jobs. It's 2-year degree jobs at the technician level. It's 4-year degree jobs. It's other industries. But the other part I want to talk about is we talk about supply chain. But this is huge, just given the importance of semiconductors and chips across just about every industry and so many products that we use day to day. It's not just the suppliers, but I think we'll see it touches inflation, it touches what those manufacturers can do. Everything from your coffee pot, so I don't know who didn't drink coffee today, but you're my hero and isn't fully caffeinated. But you look at that, our day-to-day appliances use these chips. And so we've had a huge shortage. We've had to get them from Asia. You look at national defense, but I think it's in supply chain. But it's really interesting how many existing Ohio companies that haven't been able to meet their demand or grow because they didn't have chips, it's going to help them as well. So it's huge for the manufacturing community in Ohio as well.
Yeah, So let's add another wrinkle to it here. So part of the reason Intel is able to move forward so big is because of the recently passed CHIPS Act. And that drives the importance of chips and broadband all at the same time. And Justin, I know how important this is to the members of the chamber, and how are they reacting to Intel? How are they thinking about broadband right now?
Excited. Broadband continues to be a major focus. Obviously, there are 1 million Ohioans without access to high-speed broadband right now, and I think over 300,000 households that have no internet access right now. So both the federal dollars and then the Ohio residential broadband program that was enacted here recently will go a long way toward addressing those issues. And it's an opportunity for communities to utilize those dollars to complete some of those last mile connections and get people connected in a high-speed internet environment. From a supplier standpoint, just going back to your previous question just for a second, it truly is a statewide impact. Not all of those suppliers are currently located or will locate in Licking County, Ohio. This is going to be an impact that spreads out across the state, and as a result of that, you'll see the secondary effects of the support businesses that come along with it: hospitality, restaurants, service industry, education. It's going to be a massive impact statewide because it's just going to multiply the impacts wherever those suppliers locate. So from a chamber's perspective, obviously we're excited about the CHIPS Act because it means that Intel project grows by 5 times, and the impact grows more than that. So we hear calls from prospective members: how can we join the chamber? How can we get involved? How can we work with you to improve the climate in Ohio from a business perspective? So we're excited about it. So looking forward to building that out further.
Can I add one more thing on that? Talking about
Sure,
Intel
of course,
before we
yeah.
go totally into chips. But I do want to add a couple other things, because you talked about like the ripple effect and supply chain and existing manufacturers. But the other thing that's really interesting with Intel, and again, the precedent they're setting with their making an investment to make sure they have the workforce that they need, it's really interesting too. And I think this is something, talking about what we're hearing from our members and how our members are preparing. And this was great. Knowing this panel was today, it really gave me an opportunity to circle back and talk to some of our key members and our thought leaders all across the state, and asking them, how are you preparing? And across the board, the communities know they need to be prepared, and they had convened stakeholders. Some, it varies. Some of them are doing very C-level, and they're looking at understanding the technology and how they can adapt their industry sector strategies and try to understand the industry a bit more. Others are bringing together housing, transit. Those who are within an hour of Columbus are looking at it, what it means to them in terms of, we have to be prepared for what this means. Housing is already a challenge, workforce is a challenge. So across the board, economic developers are helping to convene the stakeholders and start to tackle some of these issues. And one thing I heard a lot of questions and concern about is making sure that Ohio has a climate which is not just attractive to Intel, but other projects like that and other companies where they have an ESG policy platform where things like environment, diversity, equity, inclusion, governance are really important to them. So Ohio, everyone wants to capitalize on this, and it's great, but we won't be able to capitalize on it if we're not looking at our energy policy. A lot of these companies have minimums amounts of their energy that needs to come from renewables. Yet lately we've seen the state putting up, a few hurdles when it comes to renewables, wind and solar. So we have to think about that. Can we meet their needs? And then I think we also need to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's interesting because Intel has a commitment by 2030 to have at least 50%, double their women and underrepresented minorities in their senior leadership positions. So again, that ripple effect, but also knowing where we may be not as attractive, and to see our members convening and starting to talk about those issues and those challenges is, it's very positive, but we're going to have to continue to have those conversations.
Yeah, it's an exciting but important and difficult challenge moving forward. And, Beth, just thinking of all of this that we're talking about with Intel and broadband, you can't do that without engineers. So how are you thinking about this? What perspective do you have?
True, and it's interesting because everything that's happening when it comes to economic development in general, but Intel specifically, the engineering community was right there to assist. Right when the state knew that they might have a chance at this, there were engineering consulting companies that were in there looking at the site, looking at water, looking at power. And to Jennifer's point, Intel has some pretty strict guidelines when it comes to green energy, how they're using their water, what type of renewables they want to use. And I think the engineering community was ready and willing and able to assist with those kind of questions. I agree with Jennifer 100% when it comes to what Ohio needs to be looking at to be competitive and to continue to draw in companies like Intel. It's pretty important, and we in the engineering community take that very seriously too, and are taking a look at what we do on the diversity, equity, and inclusion side of things. And the workforce, it's nice that Intel was working directly with Ohio State and creating engineering technical programs that will assist Intel. We're hoping that trickles down over into the engineering consulting side of things too. Because it is an area that there's a huge shortage of, and we are very concerned about it. And so the more we can partner with these companies and look at our workforce and our workforce needs and develop programs, the better off we'll all be here in Ohio.
Yeah, no, these are such excellent points that broadband, Intel, workforce, there's so many aspects to economic development. There's so much to it. And Justin, I'm thinking from the Chamber's perspective, what's your research saying about all this moving us forward?
Yeah, I think one of the major issues is going to be, and continues to be, workforce. Obviously, during the pandemic, there was a pretty dramatic shift in Ohio's workforce. And while we've made some decent progress toward recovering, we still are not back to pre-pandemic levels. In fact, Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics said that the number of employed Ohioans as of July 2022 is still fewer than in December 2018. So we've still got a little bit of progress to make in recovering our workforce and addressing some of those barriers to employment. As we talked about, it's housing, it's transportation, it's daycare. What are those other ancillary costs that are eating into people's capacity and willingness to enter the workforce? How can we address those issues and then help solve some of those workforce challenges?
Yeah, and certainly in a time like this and coming out of COVID, we know we can't think in silos anymore. Infrastructure doesn't live in buckets that are neatly disconnected from each other. We have to knit them all together. And Beth, you and I were talking a little bit about how engineering companies are bringing a system mindset to this, and how is this new way of thinking helping to guide what we're doing here?
Yeah, I think, with the pandemic, we saw a change in mobility and what people needed to travel. And, bicycle sales rose, right? People were riding their bike, not only recreational, but to work. And so, do you need more trails? Do you need more pedestrian paths? What do we need for public transit? And so I see our member companies moving to more systematic, holistic approaches when they're looking at projects. And I think that's a good thing. For example, we just had a grand award winner for our engineering excellence down in Southwest Ohio, Lick Run. And it was a traditional combined sewer overflow project, but they took that opportunity to work with the community, and the community had been, underinvested in. I mean, it just really needed to be brought something new and something that they could come together on. And so the alternative was not traditional. The alternative brought in green space and water park for kids and pedestrian bridges and bike paths into an inner city community that was really in need of it. And So again, looking at the holistic approach of what the communities need and working with our clients to make sure we understand and solving those problems is where we are as an engineering community. Ironically enough, ODOT just informed me that they won a RAISE grant for Erie County. And while that was a traditional safety program, what was included in it beyond roundabouts and congestion relief are bike paths and pedestrian paths. And so I see our state agencies moving that route too, beyond our local communities.
Yeah, no, it's so important. We see this at the regional level too, where you can't just do a bike trail plan without thinking about access and equity, but also entrepreneurship and economic development and how that can move a community forward. One of the things the governor brought up when he was talking earlier was playing the long game in economic development. And I think this goes to that system mindset where it's great that you can sell the state and sell the workforce and have the infrastructure, but unless you have the site ready, you can't attract the company. And what I'm talking about are brownfields. And he made the point that when a business calls looking for a site, they're ready to go. And so the good news, and I say this kind of a point of privilege as somebody who used to work on the Clean Ohio Brownfields program, how excited I am about the leadership of Greater Ohio and the legislature in restoring funding for brownfields at $350 million for our state. That's a long way of saying, how is this going to impact economic development in the state?
Well, what's really interesting about that program too is that there were dollars for every county, which is great. So everyone can start to address them because some of the brownfields are smaller, but what they do, but they're still very cost prohibitive for many communities. But what they do is when you clean up a brownfield, you have a average 4-to-1 return on investment, and that's just dollars. But when you look at it, it becomes really a catalyst. And it breathes new life and energy into a community, and it attracts and it helps with housing, and it attracts other businesses. So not only do you get a site that's been sitting there unused, and again, right now, we talk about workforce, we talk about transit, we talk about infrastructure. Right now, Ohio is not in a position to have any land not serving a purpose. And I'm not talking about building on everything, but I am talking about sitting there unused, underutilized. And so it's really important for us when it comes to sites and cleaning those up. And some of the smaller ones still end up being, they can become infill development. They can start to address some of these other issues that we have. And the $350 million was a huge investment and very important. And we're seeing the impact of that already. And again, it really serves as a catalyst. But now with not only Ohio's attractiveness for mega projects, but even other things that don't quite hit those levels, they need really large sites. And to clean up some sites in the urban core and larger ones even outside of that, you could be looking at $100 million just on that. So I think that program is very important, and continuing to have dollars going to each county and making sure we can tackle the brownfields cleanup in Ohio. We need to also, I think, give some consideration, is there a need for a parallel track at the same time, what used to be considered, kind of like Superfund type of things. And so I think that's something we have to have a lot of discussion about, because we need to be able to have large sites that are ready to go, and cleaning them up is the first one, and acquiring the land and assembling it to have big sites for these bigger projects. So I think that we need to look at some strategies and maybe some programs and tools that get us to these really large things so that we have sites that are ready.
Yeah, and it's exciting for me because earlier in my career, I worked with Jennifer in a community called Gehanna on developing brownfields, but I also worked with Beth in working on a brownfield. And Beth, I know your excellent leadership there helped us completely flip around a contaminated site, and engineering companies are still doing that good work. How are you feeling about this investment?
Yeah, no, I think it's a worthwhile investment and needed, and yeah, we certainly are helping to transform those brownfields into usable space for economic development, and we'll continue to do that. And I'm glad that dollars are being put into it, for sure.
No doubt. And you can't do any of this without involving public-private partnerships. And Justin, I want to transition here before we get to our last question about what do your members, what do they need from local governments? What do they need from regional councils? And how can they partner better in this time?
Yeah, I think the partnership question is a good one because anytime we see an economic development project like this, there's always partnership with the local governments, the regional councils, and business leaders. You look at take like Burke Lakefront Airport in Cleveland, for example. That would eventually transform into like a Metro Park, for example. That would be given to the Metro Park system, and then you could have an economic component to that where you're building some sort of commercial experience alongside that, so you're not just going to the beach and then going home. You're actually able to spend some time there and go shopping, sit at a restaurant, have some experiences there with your family, and create more of an all-encompassing approach. So I would say for local governments, regional councils, reach out to your local chambers. I know you know them, but make sure you're making those connections pretty frequently because they don't answer to the Ohio Chamber, but we have a very symbiotic relationship, and we know what the issues are impacting the businesses in those areas. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call a specific company if you have a question or an issue. Give an example. Clark County took some of their federal dollars recently and put that toward investing in last mile connections for broadband in Clark County. So a couple thousand homes in Clark County are now online in a high-speed environment because they used their federal dollars and reached specifically out to Spectrum and said, hey, can you help us solve this issue? So there are dozens of different ways you could partner. And from the business community's perspective, we'll continue to raise issues when we see specific concerns or issues bubbling up. But I think always being willing to have that opportunity to invest in a community, have that opportunity to remedy a brownfield site and make an investment, and work with engineers to find the right solution for a particular community, a particular project is something we're always going to be looking for. So expect our phone calls as well.
Well, great. Well, we are at the end of a conversation. I wish I could keep going because I want to keep picking your brains. But I need you to bring out your wish list or your crystal ball here for this last question. We're here today because there's a governor's race. And we know that so much has changed in the last 4 years. So, Justin, I'm going to start with you to finish this out here. What's on your wish list, your priority list for the governor, and even further, what do you think the next 4 years Ohio needs to do?
Well, we'll have probably a bit more to say about this in the fall. We're actually working right now on sort of a long-range economic blueprint for the state of Ohio that we're going to roll out here in a few weeks, and we'll work with the administration to enact those priorities when we are in a position to do so. I think for the Chamber's perspective, it's going to continue to be about workforce and all the associated things that come along with that. We talked about housing and energy requirements and daycare and transportation. It's going to require an all-the-above approach to energy to really better utilize the resources that we have and also welcome new entrants into the market to keep Ohio's energy prices competitive for businesses. It's going to continue to focus on education and taxes and regulation, obviously, but there's going to be a lot to build off of from the last 4 years and keep some of the momentum going. So
yeah, so all of the above sounds like systems thinking to me. Beth, what's on your wish list as you look for the next?
A lot, and I'm sure the three of us will repeat the same thing a little bit, but a lot of what Justin said is on our wish list. Obviously, workforce. We want a champion for Ohio that is supporting a strong economic environment for our businesses. To be a little bit more specific, clearly we want more infrastructure funding. Obviously, the wastewater has been a huge success for the communities, but also for the engineering community. Clean water is certainly something that we 100% support. The education piece of it, the Tech Cred program has been fantastic. I would like to see that continued, as well as investment in the future of needs of workforce in Ohio. And the energy. Clearly, if we're looking at an EV system, where's that energy coming from and what does the grid look like? I think those are important things that we need to be considering in the next 4 years.
Great, thank you. Jennifer?
Do we have 20 minutes? No,
I'll give you 3. How's that?
Okay, I'll take it. And again, I think everything that's already been said, again, with workforce and looking at not again just how do we skill people, upskill them, reskill them, train them, but how do we pull them into the workforce and make it so they can participate fully in Ohio's economy and have a real chance at prosperity and economic opportunity. I think another one talking about energy, making sure that we have, a big part of our policy platform is making sure that we have reliable, resilient, affordable energy, and that means making sure that all different types of energy sources are on the table, and that we have stable state energy policy that's not necessarily different at the local levels. So I think that's something we have to be aware of and a little wary of. I think another one, when we look at economic development tools and programs, and we're really fortunate in Ohio, and I'm not saying that, but when I talk to my peers around the state, we just had a call, they're not just jealous of Intel, they're jealous of our entire ecosystem, and it's working. I think it's 10 years in with the current model. I think any kinks there were, been worked out, and we're seeing that it's working. It's impactful, it's nimble, but another big part of that is making sure that when there are tools and programs, that the state doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach, or say this is the program you all have to use, because sometimes it's not something they need. We have communities who are growing too fast, where a certain program might be detrimental. We have communities that don't have the resources and they might need something else. So I think making sure that we allow flexibility in our programs, we don't take a one-size-fits-all approach, will be big. And then the last one is when we talk about all these dollars and where they're going to go and who's going to be eligible, some are going to be competitively awarded, some there's a federal funding formula. But I think it's really important, and we've seen this with the ARPA dollars, is there are some communities, again, that had the money to do the planning, had plans on the shelf, could hit the ground running and start to use those dollars. They could engage consultants. Not everyone did. So we know that there are communities that have dollars that are unspent, and we know our members and all the partners are trying to work with them to help them, but there's a real fear. They're not experienced with using federal funds, and there's a lot of things that go with that, and it's daunting. And so making sure that when we give consideration to making sure that, especially things where there's going to be grant programs, that entities that can know how to do this, have experience with federal funds and grant programs, that they're eligible for these dollars as well. So absolutely, our local governments are very important, and they do a lot of things really well. But we just want to make sure, especially when you get to small communities, that there can be other entities that are eligible for dollars, especially federal dollars.
So well said. So at Morpsey, we focus on what we call creating an environment for prosperity, which means thinking big, paying it forward with workforce or other investments, driving investment. It's all about raising our expectations and not slowing down. And I think this panel did an excellent job of representing that today. So Justin, Beth, Jennifer, let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.